First of all, mega response to yesterday's video and the question that I posed at the end of it, which was, should Monaco have a place on the Formula One calendar of today? I don't think I can split it. Massive response, but totally split between all of you. And I guess that's what's so brilliant about F1, isn't it? Opinions are always being split, always generating some kind of discussion. And, you know, half of you think it should go because there's no overtaking. Half of you think that it's just a special place and should always have a place on the F1 calendar. Lots of you coming up with some quite good suggestions, I thought, about how you might change the format of the event. Make it a time trial, make it a couple of different sprint races, lots of different things. Should we, you know, change the circuit layout slightly to try and encourage overtaking? Lots of good discussion points. I've picked up on a number of them in the comments section of yesterday's video. I have read every single comment on there, so thank you very much to all of you for contributing to those. I think it's a really interesting discussion. Personally, I love Monaco. I think it should stay, but I'm quite open to the fact we should be tweaking the format perhaps. I've got nothing against changing the entire Monaco weekend as being a one-off special event, because watching a car go around there in qualifying on the limit, at the absolute limit of everything that a driver and the car has got, is nothing short of spectacular and amazing. If that's the highlight of that weekend, let's make that the feature. Anyway, it's Q&A Monday, Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday. Today's Monday, you'll see it Tuesday. Let's get on to it. This little guy can't walk very far yet. So on these walks, he's got to be carried for half of it. I know, it's ridiculous, isn't it? I'd still rather have him with me than leave him at home. Oh, mate. Right, first question. Rich John says, do the mechanics in the garage hear the driver radios, and therefore how do the negative attitudes of some drivers go down? I said in yesterday's video there's a lot of moaning going on, and you know what, it does have an impact on the team. Because you know, you don't want to hear your driver moaning. You want to hear your driver trying to overcome problems, to do whatever he can or whatever it takes to get around a problem or to take an opportunity that might be there. The last thing you really want to hear is your driver sounding down and depressed or bored or miserable or like he can't be bothered, because you know, he's the guy in that team that you look up to as a mechanic or an engineer. And so if he's sounding like that, what's to stop everyone else starting to sound like that? And therefore the whole kind of energy within that team starts to dwindle. So you do need a driver who's positive. You need a driver who, if there's a problem, he wants to find the solution. He wants to find a way around it. That's exactly what Daniel Ricciardo did in his car yesterday, but not what some of the others did. MD Games says, how much interest did you have in the F2 or GP3 races from Monaco, and in general, I guess you're saying, because they were spectacular? Yeah, they normally are, and actually I really enjoy particularly F2. I try to follow. It's not always that easy, particularly when I'm at a Grand Prix, because I'm always working and doing other things whilst that's on. But look, these are the stars of the future. They're all in the same machinery, which is crucial. You know, a little bit like you know, Formula E, for example, where the engineering is very similar and the differences between cars are very small. It puts the onus on the driver, and therefore the driver can make the difference. And we start to see drivers shine, the very best drivers shine in places like F2 and GP3. And the racing, because it's so close, is generally spectacular. So yes, I love it. I don't get to watch as much of it as I would like, but it's a great spectacle. I love great racing. I don't care really what it is. If there's a great lawnmower race on telly, I'd love to watch it. Peter Wright says, now that the FIA have specifically banned oil burning through the turbo, does Ferrari still burn oil on startup? And what I guess you're referring to, Peter, is that smoke that pours out of the garage every time the Ferrari starts the engine up. Yes, it still does it. It still does it to some extent. And it's not that the FIA have suddenly banned oil burning through the turbo. They have just clarified that that was never allowed. It's not something that has changed. It's just that there's been a clarification. I think the smoke coming out of the Ferrari at startup is nothing much more than some oil getting past seals, for example, in the turbo when it's all cold, as the engine fires up, and some of that of course gets into the exhaust and is spat out into the pit lane. I don't really think there's too much to read into all of that. Andy Bottomley, thanks for your question. You say, what are the chances that the proposed F1 sprint race, if indeed the race weekend format goes in that direction, what are the chances that that could all happen in equal cars, so the drivers can show off their skill, etc.? Look, I think we'd all love to see it. The chances are pretty much zero. And the main reason for that is because all of the drivers in modern F1 now have so many commercial contracts that tie them into certain brands or certain manufacturers. You know, there's no way, for example, that you could see a Lewis Hamilton racing in something other than a Mercedes, you know, on a Grand Prix weekend. You know, of course, there are ways around it. Look, we see Fernando Alonso racing in something other than a Renault this year with his WEC duties, but it's highly unlikely. There's absolutely no way you'd get the entire Formula One field racing something from a rival or another manufacturer and using different brands in terms of engines and tyres and fuels and all of these different things that they all have their own individual commercial contracts with their teams, are so complicated to get around that it just won't happen, unfortunately. But it would be great, wouldn't it? How much would we all love to see them all go head to head in the same machinery? It'd be awesome. Kirky Worky says, I love your Twitter and YouTube handles. They're just brilliant. They keep me entertained a lot when I'm going through the comment sections. Kirky Worky says, is Nico Hulkenberg the most underrated driver in F1? He's definitely up there, isn't he? He's whether he's underrated, I'm not sure, because I think people do rate him. You know, he came very, very close to signing a Ferrari contract a few years ago, and I mean, so close that I think he even had his signature on the contract. Ferrari didn't. So I think he's a great driver, but the absolute greats, the multiple world champions, the legends of our sport, find a way to stand out. Even in machinery that may not be race-winning machinery, they find a way to sort of raise themselves above the parapet and make sure that people notice them. And whilst Nico Hulkenberg, you know, hasn't gone unnoticed, I think he's highly rated within Formula One as a driver. I just don't think he's had that last, 1% that the likes of, the Ayrton Sennas, the Michael Schumachers of this world, even people like Max Verstappen, and I know that will be a controversial comment, but Max Verstappen is standing out from the crowd. And yes, he's having some accidents at the moment. It's not going his way this season, but his driving, his performances and his speed have made him shine out from the crowd within a highly experienced Formula One field. So I don't think Hulk has got that last little bit. Perhaps he did have for a while. Perhaps he had his opportunity when he nearly got that Ferrari drive, but it just didn't quite get it across the line. Whilst we're on the subject of Max Verstappen, Bender's Gaming Channel says, do you think Red Bull Racing have built their team around the wrong driver? Because Daniel Ricciardo is shining right now. Max is having those problems that we talked about. No, I don't think... Well, first of all, I don't think they have built a team around Max Verstappen yet, by any means. My feeling at the moment, actually, is that they will end up retaining both of their two drivers for next year. I've just got a feeling at the moment that the two other main slots at Ferrari or Mercedes, I'm not sure that they are going to be right for Daniel Ricciardo, or more that Daniel Ricciardo is going to be right for those two slots. I just think the Sebastian Vettel factor, and this is assuming Lewis stays. If Lewis doesn't stay at the end of this year, then perhaps Daniel's a perfect fit for that team at Mercedes. But I kind of think it's going to end up shaping out that they end up staying with him at Red Bull Racing. So to answer your question, no, I don't really think that Red Bull have put all their eggs in the Verstappen basket. I don't think they've built a team around him. I think they've signed him up long term, which is great, but I think it's a media and perhaps a fan perception that means that they're backing him as their lead driver. I don't think that's the case. I think they desperately want to keep hold of Daniel Ricciardo, and if they can keep the pair of those two, once Max comes out of this phase that he's in, which he will come out of, I still believe they will have the strongest driver pairing of any team on the Formula One grid. Right, I'll carry this on at home because this one's tired, and this one has just stung his leg on about 1,000,000 stinging nettles. Are you alright, buddy?
No.
No. So we've got to get home. Marius Duplessis says, you've just noticed on the Mercedes halo, that bulbous section in the middle of the top section of the halo. And he says that they don't run winglets on the top of the halo, whereas other teams do, but he hasn't seen the bulbous section on other cars. Why is that? So the halo itself is made of titanium. It's a titanium bar, just a round section bar that makes up the shape of the halo. The rules then allow the teams to put some kind of aerodynamic shrouding around that titanium bar to make it aerodynamic, and to be able to paint it and to make it cosmetically pleasing, but mostly for aerodynamic purposes. Some teams have chosen to have a very small shroud around the halo with some winglets or little tiny aerofoils around the top of that halo section. You're given something like a 20 millimeters, it's quite vague wording actually in the regulations, but about 20 millimeters of space to play with around the halo. So some teams have gone for a smaller shroud with a kind of winglet on the top. Mercedes have chosen to take up that 20 millimeters of space they're allowed by having a much bigger, much more aerodynamically profiled carbon fibre shape shroud around the whole titanium ring of the halo itself. So it's just aerodynamic preference is the only reason for it. Josh Finch says, what kind of things can cause the brake issues like Leclerc's? Was it things like getting debris in the brake ducts? Yes, absolutely, that can cause massive overheating problems for the brakes on a Formula One car. If you get those ducts blocked by debris on a street circuit like Monaco, that's even more likely because there are crisp packets, paper cups, all sorts of things kicking around the streets of these places. The other in these modern Formula One cars is that the rear braking is all done, of course, on this brake-by-wire system linked into the ERS, or the energy recovery system. And if there's a problem with that, it can very, very quickly affect particularly the rear brakes of the car. Vasilis Alexiadis says, when teams set performance targets... when teams set performance when teams set performance targets for the following... Sorry, Vasilis. When teams set performance... Oh, here comes the other one. When teams set performance targets for the following season, what specifically are they in terms of lap time? Actually, most teams won't set a lap time target for the following season because it's so variable on things like, tracks being resurfaced, differences in tyres, obviously the conditions at each event and those kind of things. And there are so many things that are beyond the team's control that could change and affect actual lap time. So really what they're targeting is a car that might remedy some of the problems or the issues that they may have suffered during this season. So if a driver is saying it's a car that suffers with high-speed understeer, or it's a car that can't handle the very high-speed circuits, or the low downforce circuits, or the high downforce circuits, specific traits that might be a negative in the current car, those will be the things they'll try to target. What they do in terms of lap time is try to target a certain amount of lap time perhaps per race in terms of updates throughout a season. So they'll be looking to bring maybe a tenth or 2/10 of a lap per race or per upgrade, however a team works. So generally not season to season, but definitely race to race. Right, final question for this week. Mate, it's the final question, come on. Final question for this week. Gonzo says, in Monaco, with Ricciardo being able to win with all the problems that he had, does that highlight how bad the Monaco Grand Prix track is? And this is a question that's obviously come up lots. It was a question that I asked in yesterday's vlog. Many of you have responded with mixed opinions on this. Look, the way I look at this is we have to take the season as a whole, and what we want from any Formula One season is variety. We don't want the same type of track at every event. We don't want the same people winning at every event. And what we've got this year is different circuits clearly suiting different teams and different drivers. And personally, I think that's great. Now, I know that Monaco is such a difficult place to overtake, and I completely get the argument of everybody who said we shouldn't have a circuit on the F1 calendar where you can't overtake. I get that. However, I also think that if you take Monaco as a whole, as a weekend, you know, you can't take your eyes off that race. Not because there's action all the time, but because a tiny little factor could cause massive action. The drivers are on the limit for the entire Grand Prix. They are running this close to the barriers, and you know, any kind of little incident can have a major impact in Monaco. So we're glued to our TV sets, so we're glued to the race for those reasons, waiting for that to happen, waiting for a driver to make a mistake. And I know that yesterday we had very few of those. Obviously Charles Leclerc's incident because of his brake failure was a big one. Daniel's car failing was a major incident. It created some drama because we could hear it all playing out on the team radio. We knew as fans that Daniel was having to work hard for this victory. He was having to manage, him and the team, having to manage the way that car went round the lap and went through the rest of the race. So I don't think, you know, this is a little bit like after Australia when there was no overtaking Australia. Everyone called for getting rid of the Melbourne GP. I'm not into that. I'm not a fan of that. I think we have to take each race as a different entity. We shouldn't be looking for exactly the same thing. You know, perhaps we look at Monaco and we say, well, qualifying is the big highlight, the big feature of that weekend. Whereas at many races, qualifying, you know, doesn't really matter that much to some extent, and the race is where it matters. You can overtake, so it doesn't matter too much where you qualify. In Monaco, the big focus for everybody has to be qualifying, so that becomes perhaps the main event. And if we, as I said at the start, if we need to change the format of the Monaco event to make that a feature, to make that the biggest part of the weekend, you know, I'm not against doing that. I'm not such a traditionalist that we have to stick with exactly the same format at every race. Hold on. They are like this all day, every single day. It's ridiculous. So look, that's my opinion. I don't think that it highlights that it's a terrible track. It's not the best race track. We all know that. You know, that's no surprise to everybody. But look, the other thing is, we all know every year there's going to be hardly any, if any, overtaking at Monaco. Yet we all tune in. Yesterday had, you know, a spike, a peak viewing figure number that was greater than the year before, and yet we all knew, you know, the probable outcome as a spectacle in that race. We can't not watch Monaco. We can't not watch Monaco because we all love it for all the reasons, the glamour, the glitz, you know, the driver skill, of which there is lots, and mostly because we love to see a driver putting it that close to the limit. So that's what I think. There you go. I'd love to know what you think. Let me know what you think on all of the answers to these questions that I've given today. I'm sure you've all got slightly different opinions, some of you. Let me know what they are. You know, I really enjoy going through the comments. I've tried to read every single comment in the last few vlogs, and I've tried to respond to as many, if only by liking them to let you know that I've read them. But please do keep them coming. It's a really enjoyable part of my day going through those. So thanks very much. Hope you enjoyed this one. There'll be another Q&A next Monday/Tuesday. So start firing questions in for that. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I will see you tomorrow.